Well, Brooke, we have another special guest here this morning. Insurance Commissioner John King is in studio. I want to get your live review of Brooke's intro rap.
You know what? Following a great tradition of entertainers in Georgia, I mean, the Grammy's on the way.
Well, Commissioner, we know that being an insurance commissioner isn't exactly as well known as being a governor or being a U.S. senator or another statewide office. But before we launch him, let's talk a little bit about yourself and how you rose from working the Atlanta Police Department's beat as a beat cop, right, to the highest ranks of Republican officialdom. You call yourself the Swiss Army knife of politicians.
Yes, I like to, describe myself as a multi-tool. I started my career. I was born and raised in Mexico, and so that's why I always try to explain my accent, which is very, a lot of people scratch their heads, but my father's from South Georgia, from Berrien County, Nashville, Georgia, as they say, down yonder.
The other Nashville.
But he joined the Merchant Marine at a very early age, and he went and fought World War II. Retired and went to live in Mexico and married my mom, and I was born and raised there. And so he wanted me to learn how to speak English and brought me to Albany, Georgia. And I graduated from high school and I came to Atlanta and went to Georgia State University. And to pay for college, I joined the Atlanta Police Department. And so my first assignment with the Atlanta Police Department while I was in field training was walking what they call high crime foot patrol on Auburn Avenue. And one of my duties at night was to walk Coretta Scott King to her car.
Wow.
And if anybody should have had a tough time dealing with a young white cop, it should have been Coretta, and she was incredible. Taught me the responsibility of a young police officer, not the chief, not the lieutenant, not the captain, to own the security of that assigned area that he or she has. And so that began my love affair with public service and policing. I loved working for the Atlanta Police Department. I had some incredible opportunities. I worked for some real, incredible, very notorious people. Eldrin Bell was one of my bosses. And so I had an incredible career. Worked intelligence and organized crime. I was one of the original Red Dog officers when crack cocaine hit the streets of Atlanta. And then I had the opportunity to join. I got offered a position with the Doraville Police Department, where I rose through the ranks and ended up my career as a chief of police for 14 years there. But at the same time, I joined the Georgia Army National Guard as a private. Fell in love with the idea of driving a tank. And so I joined the National Guard and went through from private and retired about 9 months ago as a major general in the Army. My last assignment was at NORAD Northcom in Colorado Springs. And I had a variety of assignments all over the world: Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Africa, the border, COVID, you name it. And so that gave me a whole list of skill sets that really is, I think, I put into benefit to be able to support Georgia, and it's just my passion.
And are there any parallels between driving a tank and running for office in a state like Georgia?
Very much so. I've become a connoisseur of fried fish and barbecue across Georgia and campaigning, and I enjoy getting to talk to people, because most people have no idea what the Insurance Commission does. And so I've been able to apply all these experiences to talk to people, and the lessons that I learned in Atlanta, walking a footbeat, working East Lake Meadows under some incredible folks that live in the communities. So I put all those and apply those to what I do today.
John, you and I have known each other for a very long time. I first, I think, met you when you were an Atlanta cop. And then I got to know you better when you were at the chief of police at Doraville, and I was at the Anti-Defamation League, where we trained law enforcement officers in how to deal with hate crimes and the like. And I want to say, before I ask you my question, that for people who don't know you in your law enforcement career, you were always one of the most highly regarded police officers in certainly North Georgia. I mean, your reputation as chief in Doraville was sterling. And I'm interested in how you made the transition You were first appointed as insurance commissioner by Governor Kemp. Then you became the first Hispanic to win statewide office when you ran for the post, and now can say you've been elected to that position. So you really fill an important role just as a frontiersman in terms of being a Hispanic elected to statewide office. I don't quite understand where that transition, though, took place.
It's strictly by accident. I mean, believe me, 5.5 years ago, I was very happy being a chief of police and being very happy being a general officer in our army. But I got asked to serve. And so the call to service, when Governor Kemp asked me, hey, I need you to come and help rebuild the confidence in this broken agency and get back to the business of taking care of Georgians. That to me seemed like a typical call that I've gotten over the majority of my adult life. It's a call to service. And I did not know much about insurance, but now I'll tell you, in the last 5.5 years, I've become quite knowledgeable in the problems and how to solve real hard problems that we have in Georgia and how we're making progress.
You're because you were elected as first Hispanic statewide, you've been able to serve something of a dual role for Kemp's administration, certainly doing the work as insurance commissioner, but you've also been active in terms of his positioning on immigration issues. You were with the governor when he went to the Texas border recently. Talk to us a little bit. Governor Kemp's been very active in saying he supports Governor Abbott and Abbott's decision that he is going to put his own National Guard troops in that portion of the border that the Supreme Court said, you got to let the Border Patrol back in here. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. Talk to us a little bit about how you feel about hearing a governor like Kemp say, I'm going to send National Guard's troops to the border.
Well, it's a great question because Governor Kemp in this administration has not been the first one that had to deal with problems in the border. I mean, we've had to deal with problems on the southern border for multiple administrations. I mean, I've been deployed to the border multiple times. President Obama deployed soldiers to the border. President Bush deployed soldiers to. I mean, I spent time. Under the Trump administration. I was the first commander of major units on the border. And we focus, because I was born and raised in Mexico, and so I understand the culture, and I have relationships with the Mexican military. Our problem set is to secure that border, there's no bumper sticker. That is the magic solution. The wall is part of that conversation, but it's not the only conversation. Doing economic development on both sides of the border, getting both countries to secure the border is what's going to take. This is a very complex problem. Right now we have absolute chaos. Is an ungoverned part of on the Mexican side is an ungoverned part. The cartels are running. And so the amount of human tragedy occurring, we call ourselves, we Americans, and we love life. What's going on right now is horrible. By the way, this current policy that the administration that I don't agree with is destroying not only the border region, but it's destroying our economies. It's also destroying the Mexican economy and the Central American countries' economies, because this multitude of people coming through, those regions don't have the resources to take on and support that amount of humans moving through this area. So the status quo is a disaster. And so I think I understand Governor Abbott. Out of desperation, he has to do so. His job is to protect all Texans. And the fact that the current policy is affecting not only economies of blue states, but it's also affecting red states. And so the status quo is not acceptable. And we need to be able to push back.
Well, Commissioner, let me ask you this, because there's been a lot of finger pointing from both sides of the political aisle about who's to blame. Do you see this right now, what's happening at the border, as a shared responsibility for Democrats and Republicans, who both have dropped the ball over the past decades over immigration control?
I agree. I agree that both sides have used immigration as a political football. I mean, the Obama administration had a majority of both houses and in the White House. If there would have been an opportunity to get passed by the opposition party, it should have been passed then. But, There were other process complex, and I don't want to minimize that there's a magic solution that if we just do one thing, it will solve. It's going to take a massive amount of serious thoughts. The border wall is one. The economies of Latin American countries, getting companies to invest in jobs and come up with a solution of where back in the 60s and 70s we had a policy with people would come to this country for short periods of time to work. They didn't drag their families. They didn't cause this human tragedy that's occurring now. Because there was predictability. The people, people who we knew who they were would come to this country and then return. We abandoned those kind of conversations. And it's, both sides are not willing to talk about it. So they're not really serious. So I blame both sides. Governor Kemp described this. He's tired of Washington failing on this issue. Recently, I was in El Salvador attending an insurance commissioners meeting down there. And the Latin American commissioners were telling, why do you politicians keep on coming to Latin America to look for the root causes of the immigration problem? The root causes are in Washington, D.C. It's your policy that is causing and is destroying our economies. And that was an aha moment for me.
John, when we talk about border security issues with Republicans particularly, frankly, we hear a lot of talking points. President Biden could deal with this unilaterally. He really doesn't need Congress to approve a deal. We know that there is some truth to that. We know that certainly early on, the Biden administration did not address border problems the way that they might have. But you have a broader perspective, I think. When Governor Kemp says he blames Washington, what he really has been saying is he blames President Biden. But, of course, it's Republicans in the U.S. House who rejected a border security deal that might have given them a good deal of what they had been asking for. How do you square all of that when you talk about it being a problem on both sides?
I would push back a little bit on your statement. The president has his oath of office requires him to defend and protect this nation. He has the authority, and previous presidents have sent troops to the border. I mean, going all the way back to, my God, Spanish America, the U.S. Army, General Pershing going into securing the border, chasing Pancho Villa. So this is not a new thing. And I think what Republicans are saying is let's have an orderly process at the border, because Republicans have been burnt in the past. Ronald Reagan agreed to a border policy, and he got burnt because they did not invest in the improvements in securing the border, but they did all the other parts that the opposition party. And I think I think the Republicans have been burnt on this subject, and so that's why they want to get guarantees that there'll be control of the border. Now, clearly, anybody that comes to the border through a point of entry that is asking for asylum, there's a legal process. There's there's clear laws that requires us to provide hearings and all those things. But the whole idea of families coming across the Arizona desert and dying in the summer because of that is inhumane.
I apologize. I interrupted you for that. Should Republicans in the U.S. House have approved the border security deal that the Senate was pushing forward?
I don't think if I would have been a congressman, I don't think I would have bought that because of the idea of the Democratic Party has broken the trust when it comes to this topic. There's all kinds of issues but there was no guarantees. And I think that the Republicans clearly said, control the border, and then we can talk about all these other things. Had the trust not been broken in previous, I think there'd be more opportunities. But I think there's got to be some trust-building actions by the administration to get this conversation. Obviously, the conversation needs to take place. I don't disagree at all on this conversation, but it needs to be thoughtful and by serious people.
We're here with Insurance Commissioner John King. We're talking about anything but insurance right now. We're not going to ask you about President Zachary Taylor's border policies back in the 1840s. But I do want to ask you, there was a moment at the Capitol the other day where I was watching you being interviewed by a national reporter for a Hispanic media outlet who was shocked that you were Hispanic, that you spoke fluent Spanish, that you were born and raised in Mexico. And it begs the question what role you think you're going to play in 2024 as the Latino block of the electorate is increasingly important in states like Georgia that are pivotal battlegrounds. What role do you think you will play to try to energize Hispanic voters ahead of the 2024 election?
Well, that to me, I'm still in shock at the fact that this national, I had to provide my bona fides.
Like 3 times.
That I was really born and raised in Mexico. I mean, you can't tell by my accent. You can't even tell by my cowboy boots. It's funny. I never have to make that argument to Georgia-based Hispanic media. I've been a known currency in this state and throughout the region. It's Juan King. I'm a known quantity. So to me, the national media doesn't play as an important part as that those voters in making sure that they realize now they have a voice, that it's okay to speak Spanish at the Capitol. Because in the past, that was, I remember one of the first interviews that I did with Governor Kemp doing Hurricane. And you reported, wow. And I gave my remarks in Spanish. And so we need to get used to the idea that Spanish is spoken in Georgia, and that it is part of the political discourse, because Latinos are incredibly important. The margins are so tight between both parties that if we don't address the needs and the thoughts and aspirations of Latinos, we're not going to be successful in elections.
Now, where do you stand? Because a couple years ago, Donald Trump supported a primary opponent, primary challenger to your re-election bid. You have not endorsed Donald Trump yet that I've seen. Are you going to, what role do you think you're going to play? Are you going to back him?
If he's a nominee, absolutely. Because I know what we have today. Today is not acceptable for a future and successful Georgia. And that's what the process is for. I'm always leery of politicians declaring allegiance in taking away the process of a primaries. That's what primaries are for the discourse, and it's passionate and ideas. But then when a decision is made, then we either get on the bus or you don't.
So, I mean, walk our listeners through this, because Governor Kemp has taken the same stance. Donald Trump went after him 2022, backed David Perdue. He went after you, too. Your race was not as high profile as his, but it was still a very high-profile statewide race. You were one of 4 Republican incumbents who had a Trump-backed challenger. How do you still reconcile supporting him if he is the nominee? You're not endorsing him yet, but if he's the nominee, even though he went for your head in 2022?
I guess I would be upset and be wringing my hands if I was a long-term politician. I started my career as an Atlanta policeman. People many times didn't agree with me. It said some ugly, mean things to me on the streets of Atlanta and East Lake Meadows. They said some pretty bad things. You know what? I'm an optimist. You got to be an optimist if you have been an Atlanta policeman, because the sun will always come out tomorrow, and tomorrow's a better day.
John, I want to ask you a consumer question. I mean, here we have you here as the insurance commissioner, so I really want to ask you about a question that I think affects most of the people who are listening to you either on our podcast or on the radio live this morning. Auto insurance rates nationwide have gone up 20+%, and Georgia has really been particularly hard hit by increases in auto insurance. I know there are a variety of reasons for it, but apparently, I think I'm correct, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong. One of the reasons is there are ways in which insurance companies can raise rates on drivers without having to go through an approval process with the insurance commissioner and your office. Tell us about that, how that's impacted all of us who have to pay for auto insurance, and what can we do about it?
Well, years ago, a commissioner gave up the authority to review, the rates. And we fought and got that changed last year. But it was a very hard fight because the insurance industry did not want to give that authority. That's one of the factors. Another factor is the way that people drive in our beautiful city. I'm not the most considerate. I'm not allowed to describe the actual word that I want to describe. But
this is a family radio station.
This is family radio, and Greg's daughter is here, so I can't. But also is the environment of litigation. So, Georgia is considered a judicial hellhole so everybody, the lawsuits are driving a lot of these losses. And so I have more authorities, and we're working on getting some more authorities. In all fairness, this office lost because of the misconduct of previous commissioners.
Yeah.
And rightly so. The legislature reacted to that. And so now that as we are developing better confidence-building actions in our office, the legislature's giving more authorities to us. We're engaged in all kinds of things that in previous commissioners would not be allowed to do. Health insurance platform that with Georgia Access so to get back to your question, it's a combination of issues. The technology on vehicles, the number of sensors and computers. It is much more expensive now to replace those losses. We're now in a place in Georgia that if an insurance company wants to raise rates, they have to come to my office and show us their data, their losses. And I never give an insurance company what they want. We negotiate. And I look at their losses, and I have to keep the balance, between making sure that I respect the consumer because I'm elected. I'm one of few insurance commissioners in the nation. There's only 11 of us are elected. The rest of them are appointed by their governors. And making sure that the companies don't walk away from the state. As you see, California, there's been several states where companies says, we're not going to get any rate increases, we're just going to walk away from the state. And that would be more prejudicial to our state.
Here with Insurance Commissioner John King, we promised we get a couple of insurance questions in. One more before you got to go. Health insurance. We know that Governor Brian Kemp's Pathways medical insurance program has not lived up to expectations yet. Only a few thousand people have signed up for his much more limited Medicaid expansion. There is a debate underway about a full-scale Medicaid expansion. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that Pathways needs more time, or do you support a broader expansion?
I think Pathways, in all fairness, deserves a little bit more time because the federal government has thrown every obstacle that they could to delay that implementation. Now, we on the private side, we're performing now. I mean, Georgia Access, we're outperforming the federal government 3-1. People going to a marketplace, one website, and they're shopping for individual health coverage. And so we're capturing a lot of the people that are being rolled off and offering them, options for health care. And so we outperforming the federal government 3-1. So it's unprecedented the amount of success we've been having. Why? Because we've gone to local communities. We have an individual message for Dalton, for Gainesville, for Atlanta, for Southeast Atlanta, and we're providing those options. And it's not one method of communications. It's been Spanish-speaking radio, regular radio, internet, Facebook, all the social media, And so we're going and tailoring that message across Georgia, and that's, I think, one of the keys to our success.
Well, Commissioner John King, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It was great to have you here, John.
Thank you.
When we come back.